The Galactic Empire demanded tribute. Humanity waged war. Part 5. The New Order. The Varric flagship was called the Eternal Voice. It had carried that name for 900 years. It was the largest ship in the Varric Armada, nearly 4 kilometers long, with enough firepower to reduce a continent to glass, and shields that had never once been breached in all its centuries of service. It had led fleets into 47 civilizations. It had received the formal surrenders of 11 species. It was a symbol, in the truest sense, not just of power, but of the idea that the Varric order was permanent, fixed, as certain as gravity. When it burned, the whole galaxy watched. The battle that ended the war did not begin over Earth. It began at the Varric's primary logistics hub in a system 4 light-years out. When Rena's forward fleet hit the supply depot that was feeding what remained of the Armada. With their supply lines burning and their force reduced to barely a third of what they'd started with, the Varric commander made the decision to consolidate, to pull back toward Varric space and regroup, accepting a tactical retreat rather than continuing to bleed. Kang did not let them retreat cleanly. He had been planning the final engagement for 2 months. Not with certainty. Wars rarely gave you certainty. But with enough preparation that when the moment came, he was ready for multiple versions of it. He sent Rena's fleet wide to cut off the retreat route. He kept Hyun's fleet in a holding position that the Varric could not ignore without exposing their flank. And he led the center force himself, in a ship that was not the largest or the best armed, but was positioned exactly where it needed to be. The Varric had one move left that made sense: push through the center and force a gap before the flanks could close. Their commander took it. That was the move Kang had been waiting for. The Eternal Voice was in the center of the push. It was the ship with the most weapons, the best shields, the greatest ability to force through a defensive line. Putting it at the front was logical, standard, the kind of move that had worked in 47 previous campaigns. Nara's Shieldbreaker, in its 6th-generation form, was mounted on 4 ships that Kang had positioned specifically to get a clear angle on whatever ship the Varric put at the front of their push. The range limitations had been improved. The charge time had been cut by 60%. And they had spent 3 months practicing coordinated firing sequences so that all 4 weapons hit the same target within half a second of each other. Enough resonance overlap to punch through shields that a single shot might not reach. When the Eternal Voice drove into the center, the 4 ships fired together. The shields of the Eternal Voice failed completely for 11 seconds. In 11 seconds, Kang's main battery put enough firepower through that gap to end 900 years of history. The flagship broke apart slowly, the way large things do, not a single explosion, but a cascade of them. Internal systems failing in sequence, as structural integrity collapsed section by section. It was visible across the entire battle space. Every Varric ship in the engagement saw it. Every human ship did too. The Varric formation, for the first time, broke without being forced. Ships peeled away in different directions, not retreating in any coordinated way, but simply leaving. The kind of movement that comes when the center of a thing collapses, and nothing holds the edges together anymore. Rena's fleet cut off a significant portion before they could reach jump distance. Hyun's fleet handled the remainder. Some escaped. Enough escaped that the Varric would know in full detail what had happened. The battle ended in 4 hours. The ceasefire request came from the Varric civilian government, not the military command. That was notable. It meant that the people in power, the administrative structure that sat above the Armada, and had always simply received the reports of easy victories and steady tribute, had decided that the military could no longer be trusted to solve this problem. They reached out through back channels at first, then formally, on open frequencies that every species in the galaxy could receive. Yuna was the one who answered. She sat across from the Varric diplomatic team in a neutral station that one of the quietly sympathetic species had quietly offered for use. She was not in a hurry. She had brought nothing with her except a thin folder of documents and a cup of tea that she did not touch until negotiations were over. The Varric team arrived with a long list of conditions and compromise proposals, and carefully structured language designed to preserve as much of their position as possible while giving up as little as necessary. Yuna listened to all of it. Then she set the folder on the table and opened it. Humanity's terms were not complicated. The Varric would disarm completely. No armada. A strictly limited defensive force only, verified by third-party monitoring. Every civilization currently paying tribute would be released from that obligation immediately and permanently, with written acknowledgement from the Varric that those obligations had never been legitimate. All people taken as tribute workers over the past century who were still living would be returned. The Varric government would appear before a galactic tribunal to answer for 3,000 years of coercion. No occupation, no dismantling of the Varric civilization. No collective punishment of Varric civilians. Just accountability and an end. The Varric team pushed back on almost every point. The negotiation lasted 9 days. Yuna did not raise her voice once. She did not threaten. She did not perform anger or frustration. She simply held the line, clearly and quietly. And when the Varric team suggested that some of the terms were too harsh, she pointed out, in simple language, what 3,000 years of tribute had looked like from the other side of the table. On the 9th day, the Varric signed. Kang heard the news in the command center, sitting in the same chair he had sat in through most of the war. Someone brought him a cup of tea, real tea, not the synthetic version they'd been drinking for the last year due to supply shortages. And he held it with both hands and sat quietly for a while. He thought about the people who hadn't come back. He did that for a long time, because it needed to be done, because those people deserved to be thought about carefully and not quickly. Then he stood up and went to find Hyun. They didn't say much. They had worked alongside each other long enough that the silence between them held everything they would have said if they'd said it. Rena received the news on her ship, in the middle of a post-battle debrief. She read the message twice, nodded once, and then told her crew. The reaction was loud and lasted a while, and she stood at the front of it, smiling in a way that her face didn't often do, open and unguarded, and genuinely happy, which everyone who saw it would remember later. Dane was in her small office, surrounded by the same notebooks and screens she had lived with for 2 years. When the message came in, she put her head down on her desk and stayed there for several minutes. Not crying, not sleeping, just being still, for the first time in what felt like a very long time. Nara was back in her research facility. She had spent the last month working on a new project, a peaceful application of the resonance theory that she'd turned into a weapon. She read about the signing, and then went back to her work, because that was who she was. The galactic community reacted in ways that were complicated and layered and would take years to fully understand. The species that had been paying tribute for decades or centuries received their formal release from obligation, and had to figure out what that meant, what to do with freedoms they had never fully had. Some of them were grateful in ways that were difficult to express. A few of them, in the months that followed, reached out to humanity, not as subjects freed from one master looking for another, but as something genuinely new, equals, maybe, feeling out the beginnings of relationships that had never existed before. It took time. These things always take time. But something had changed that could not be changed back. The galaxy had been organized, for 3,000 years, around the assumption that the Varric order was fixed. That tribute was the price of existing. That resistance was impossible. That the only choice was how gracefully you knelt. That assumption was gone now. Not because humanity had told the galaxy to believe something different, but because humanity had shown it. There was a formal address to the Galactic Assembly 3 months after the signing. Kang delivered it. He spoke plainly, without ceremony, in the same straightforward way he had always spoken. He talked about why humanity had refused. He said it was not because they were certain they could win. They hadn't been certain at all. He said it was because the alternative was something they could not accept, and that there was a point at which uncertainty about the outcome of resistance is preferable to certainty about the outcome of submission. He said that what humanity wanted from the galaxy was not gratitude, not alliance, not power over anyone. He said what they wanted was a simple thing, that no civilization should ever again be handed a demand, like the one the Varric had sent to Earth, and be told that the only question was how quickly they would agree. He paused before the last line, not for effect, just because he wanted to say it right. We did not ask to be left alone, he said. We asked once. You should have listened. In the chamber, among the representatives of dozens of species, some of whom had carried the weight of tribute for longer than human civilization had existed, there was a silence that lasted a full minute before anyone spoke. It was the kind of silence that means something has ended, and something else has begun. The Galactic Empire demanded tribute. Humanity waged war. Part 4. The Long War. The Varric Empire did not take long to respond. 3 weeks after the battle at the Moon Corridor, their full armada arrived at the edge of the solar system. 500 warships, the largest force the Varric had assembled in 600 years, and they had only assembled it once before, to put down a rebellion of 3 civilizations that had briefly tried to fight back together. Those civilizations no longer existed. Kang stood at his screen and counted the signals as they appeared, one after another, red dots filling the display until the edge of the map was almost solid. He did not say anything for a long time. Neither did anyone else in the room. Then Hyun spoke. We're not fighting them in the solar system. Too many civilian targets. We take the fight to them. That was the decision that changed everything. Rather than defend Earth and wait for a hammer to fall, Kang and Hyun split humanity's fleets and sent them outward in 3 directions, a strategy that had never been tried in space warfare before. Because most civilizations had never been able to fight the Varric long enough for strategy to matter. The idea was to never be where the Varric expected, to never fight in the way they were prepared for, to stretch their attention across so much space that they could not focus their full strength in any one place. It worked. It also cost an enormous price in exhaustion, fuel, and lives. The war lasted 18 months. Rena commanded the forward engagement groups, the faster, lighter ships that hit Varric supply lines and then disappeared before a response could come. She seemed to understand the rhythm of the Varric response times, the gaps in their communication structure, the places where their patrols were thin. She pushed her crews hard, but she pushed herself harder, and the people under her command would have followed her into a star if she'd asked them to. She didn't ask for anything she wouldn't do herself. That was the thing they remembered about her later. She was always in the fight, not behind it. The battle at Kepler Station was one of the hardest points in the war. Varric forces managed to cut off one of humanity's main forward supply posts, trapping a significant portion of Second Fleet in a position with limited fuel and no easy route out. Kang spent 4 days without sleep working out a solution, running numbers, discarding plans, starting over. When he finally found the path, a complicated series of micro-jumps using gravity assists from a gas giant to slingshot the fleet through a gap in the Varric blockade, it required timing measured in seconds. It worked. They lost 4 ships, not 40. Hyun coordinated the defensive networks, the supply chains, the communication between fleets scattered across 4 star systems. He did it with very little visible stress, which made people around him feel steadier than they had any right to feel. He ran on short sleep and long lists, and when the pressure was worst, he had a habit of going very quiet, which those who knew him recognized as a sign that he was thinking, and that whatever he was thinking was worth waiting for. But perhaps the most important thing that happened in the 18 months of war did not happen in space at all. She was 32 years old, and had spent the first decade of her career working on theoretical energy systems in a research facility that mostly studied things that had no obvious practical use. She had a habit of working through problems on paper instead of on a screen, which her colleagues found old-fashioned, and she kept her notes in physical notebooks that she carried everywhere. She had 12 of them filled by the time the war started. The Varek ships used an energy shielding system that deflected most conventional weapons. Humanity had known this before the war started, and the mine and rail cannon approach used in the first battle had worked partly because it bypassed the shields with physical mass instead of energy. But as the war went on, the Varek adapted their shields to handle a wider range of physical impacts, and the gap that humanity had exploited began to close. Nara had been thinking about the shield system since before the war. She had a theory about the frequency at which the shields operated, and a separate theory about what would happen if you introduced a specific kind of resonance disruption at that frequency. She had not had time to test it. She had barely had time to finish writing it down. 4 months into the war, Kang's office sent a request to every research facility still operating. They needed something new, something the Varek hadn't seen, and they needed it fast. Nara sent back a summary of her theory in a 12-page document that she had written in 2 days without sleeping very much. 2 weeks later, she was in a military research center with a team of engineers, turning theory into hardware. 6 weeks after that, the first shield breaker weapon was installed on a test ship. The test worked. Every person in the observation room was silent for about 10 seconds, and then someone started shouting, and then most of the others did too. And Nara sat in a chair at the back of the room, and pressed her hands against her face, and breathed. The weapon wasn't perfect. It had a limited range, and it required the target ship to be relatively still, and it took time to charge between uses. But it worked. It entered service 2 weeks later, in the middle of an active war. The Varek did not understand what was happening the first time they encountered it. They had faced dozens of civilizations, and none of them had ever developed new weapons during a conflict. Most couldn't even sustain coordinated resistance for more than a few months. The idea that humanity would be inventing things while simultaneously fighting across 4 star systems did not fit into any model they had. When their shields began failing in ways they couldn't explain, there was a period of confusion at the command level that Rena later described when she read the intercepted communications as beautiful. But it was not just the weapons, it was the adaptations. Every time the Varek changed their approach, humanity changed first, faster. Rena redesigned fleet formations mid-campaign based on what she was seeing in real time. Hyun rewrote supply protocols to cut delivery time by 30% when the old routes became dangerous. Dane built a predictive model for Varek patrol patterns that was accurate enough to be genuinely useful, and she updated it every week as new information came in. The Varek had more ships, better individual technology, more experience with large-scale space combat. They had every structural advantage. What they couldn't match was the speed at which humans thought, changed, and thought again. Month after month, the war bled the Varek armada. Not in one great decisive battle, though there were some of those, but in 100 smaller engagements, a constant drain of ships and crew and resources that the Varek had never experienced before. They were built for campaigns that ended in weeks. They had no framework for a war that simply kept going, kept shifting, kept finding new angles. In the 14th month, something extraordinary happened. A species called the Tarathi, a small, quiet civilization that had been paying Varek tribute for 200 years, sent a signal to Earth. It was carefully worded, cautious, full of diplomatic softening language. But underneath all that softening, the message was simple. If humanity needed safe passage through Tarathi space, it would be given. Without any formal announcement. 3 weeks later, 2 more species sent similar signals. They were not joining the fight. Not yet. They were not brave enough for that, or they did not think they could survive what would happen if the Varrock found out. But they were watching. They were beginning to believe, for the first time in their long histories of submission, that the outcome of this war was not certain. That was a kind of shift that no weapon could cause. By the 18th month, the Varrock Armada had lost more than 200 ships, nearly half the force they had sent. Humanity had lost more too. The war had cost lives and resources and years of sleep that would never come back. No one involved would come out of it unchanged. But there was a difference between the two sides that was becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity was still fighting, still pushing. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the Varrock Empire was tired. The Galactic Empire demanded tribute. Humanity waged war. Part 3, The First Strike. 40 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. They came in a clean formation, 2 rows of 20, spaced evenly, moving at a speed that said they were not rushing because they did not need to rush. Their hulls were the same dark color as the ships still in orbit above Earth, and they were nearly as large. Each one carried weapons that had destroyed cities on other worlds, weapons that had turned stubborn civilizations into cautionary tales passed around in whispers among the species that remained. They were not sent to fight a war. They were sent to end one before it started. Rena watched them appear on the long-range sensors from the bridge of the UNSS Defiant, the flagship of Earth's first fleet. The Defiant was not a small ship, but next to a Varrock warship, it was a fraction of the size. She stood at the main display with her hands behind her back, watching 40 red signals move in perfect formation toward the inner solar system. She did not look worried. "Positions confirmed," said the officer at the navigation console. "They're heading for the moon colonies. Estimated arrival, 4 hours. "All fleet channels open?" Rena asked. "Yes, Commander." "Good." She straightened her jacket. "Tell 2nd and 3rd Fleet to hold in the dark. Not a single power signature. I want us completely invisible until I say otherwise." 2nd Fleet was positioned behind the shadow of Jupiter, running on minimal power. Every non-essential system shut down. 3rd Fleet was further in, sitting in a debris field between Mars and the asteroid belt. Difficult to detect, even with good sensors, and the Varrock sensors were partially blinded by Dane's jamming work. The Varrock had no idea how many ships humanity had. They were about to find out. But not yet. First, Rena let them come. The trap had been set 3 weeks ago, beginning the day after the refusal was broadcast. The approach corridor to the moon colonies was now full of things that didn't look like weapons from a distance. Thousands of small objects, each one the size of a large car, drifted through the corridor in loose clusters that looked on most sensors like ordinary debris. They were not debris. They were electromagnetic pulse mines, each one triggered remotely, designed to overload the power systems of any large vessel that passed within range. They had been built in the hidden shipyards and deployed quietly, one cargo run at a time, by ships with their transponders off. Between the mine clusters, rail cannon platforms sat on a series of small asteroids and captured rocks, fixed gun emplacements that can fire projectiles at speeds that made them effectively invisible until they hit something. No energy signature, no targeting beam, just physics. Kang watched from the command center underground as the Varrock formation moved into the corridor. He had not slept in 30 hours. He had a cup of tea on the desk in front of him that he had not touched. General Hyun stood beside him, watching the same screen, equally still. "They're not scanning the corridor carefully," Hyun said. "They don't think they need to," Kang replied. It was true. The Varric were moving with the confidence of a force that had never once been resisted. Their formation was neat, but it was not defensive. Their sensors were running, but lightly, the kind of scan you do when you expect nothing, when you've done this 100 times, and it's always been the same. They were looking for the small official fleet that humanity admitted having, the ships that appeared on public records. They were not looking for mines in the debris. They were not looking for gun platforms on rocks. They were absolutely not looking for 3 full human fleets sitting dark and quiet in the places they weren't watching. The lead Varric ship crossed the first mine threshold at exactly the 4-hour mark. Rena said one word into the open channel. Now. The corridor lit up. The mines triggered in sequence, sets of them going off in overlapping waves that washed through the Varric formation, like water through a net. The electromagnetic bursts weren't powerful enough to destroy a Varric warship outright, but they didn't need to be. They shorted out navigation systems, disrupted weapon targeting, collapsed the energy fields that the Varric ships used as shields. For about 90 seconds, the entire Varric formation was effectively blind and powerless. In those 90 seconds, the rail cannon platforms opened fire. The sound, if you could hear it in space, would have been enormous. The platforms fired in overlapping patterns, targeting the ships that the mines had hit hardest. Projectiles moving at a fraction of the speed of light punched through Varric hulls that were designed to deflect energy weapons, not solid mass, at high velocity. 3 ships were destroyed in the first minute. 4 more took critical damage. Then the Defiant dropped out of cover, and the rest of First Fleet with her. Rena flew her fleet straight through the middle of the Varric formation, while they were still trying to recover. It was a brutal, close-range fight, the kind of fighting that humanity had been doing for thousands of years, on land and sea, and eventually in the air. The kind of close, dirty, aggressive fighting that was very different from the long-range weapon exchanges that most spacefaring civilizations preferred. The Varric had better weapons at range. Up close, where their targeting systems were still scrambled and their formation was broken, the advantage disappeared. Dane, monitoring the battle from the intelligence center, watched the data with wide eyes and kept feeding information to Rena's bridge in real time. Which ships had recovered power, which were moving to regroup, where the formation gaps were opening. Her hands moved fast over her console, faster than she knew she could move, running on something that wasn't quite adrenaline, but felt like it. The fight lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 37 Varric warships were destroyed or drifting dead in space. 2 more were so badly damaged that they posed no further threat. 3 ships, the last 3 with working drives, turned and ran. Not in formation, not in any controlled way. They simply ran, firing behind them as they went, not aiming at anything specific, just desperate to be somewhere else. Rena watched them go on the main display, and did not give the order to chase. She let them run. She wanted them to get home. She wanted them to report what they had seen. The operations center underground was very quiet when the final numbers came in. Kang stood at his screen and looked at them for a long time. He had expected losses. First Fleet had taken damage, 2 ships badly enough that they were limping back to dock, and 17 crew members had not survived the battle. He held that weight without letting himself push it away. It needed to be held. But 37 Varric warships, Hyun said, very quietly. They're going to come back with everything they have. Yes, Kang said. We should prepare a statement for the public. Yuna's already writing it. She was. Yuna was in a small office 2 floors above the command center, sitting at a plain desk with nothing on it but a keyboard and a screen. She had watched the battle data the same as everyone else. She had seen the numbers. Now she was writing the statement that would go out to every human being on the planet and beyond. The statement that would tell them what had happened in the corridor near the moon. She kept it short. She kept it honest. She said that the Varric had sent 40 ships to punish humanity for refusing their demand. She said that humanity's defense forces had met them. She said the number, 37 destroyed. She ended with a line that she thought about for 10 minutes before writing it. We did not start this, but we are not finished. Across known space, the alien species who had been quietly watching humanity since the refusal received the battle data almost simultaneously. In crowded council rooms and quiet observation posts and small listening stations at the edges of systems where the Varric name was spoken with fear, they watched the numbers and sat with what those numbers meant. The galaxy had just changed in a way that could not be changed back. And the Varric Empire, for the first time in 3,000 years, had a problem. H1. The Galactic Empire demanded tribute. Humanity waged war. Part 2. The Refusal. The emergency council session lasted 11 hours. It was not a calm meeting. Ambassadors from 49 nations sat around a table that had seen many hard conversations, but nothing quite like this. People argued, people shouted, a few of them cried, which was something Yuna had never seen in that room before. There were long speeches about survival, about the size of the Varric Empire, about the 400 systems and the 3,000 years. There were quieter speeches about dignity, about what it meant to hand over 100,000 people every year and call it peace. Outside the building, millions of people waited for an answer. Yuna sat through all of it. She listened to every voice. She did not speak until the very end, when the room had exhausted itself and the arguments had all been said at least twice, and everyone looked tired in that deep, hollow way that comes from being truly afraid. Then she stood up. Every civilization the Varric has approached has been given the same choice, she said. We know this because they told us. They have done this for 3,000 years, which means every civilization that agreed is still agreeing, still sending materials, still sending people, still living under a boot and calling it survival. She paused. I don't think that is survival. I think that is a slow end with better lighting. The room was quiet. We have 30 days, she continued. I am not suggesting we use those 30 days to write an acceptance letter. I am suggesting we use them wisely. General Hyon spoke next. He pulled up no charts, showed no maps. He simply stood and said what he had to say. Our hidden shipyards are operational. The Kepler facilities have been running for 9 years. We have 112 vessels that the Varric does not know exist. They are not small ships. He let that sit for a moment. We are not ready for a full war, but we are not helpless, and we will be more ready in 30 days than we are right now. The vote was not unanimous. 17 nations voted to negotiate, to ask for time, to try to find some middle ground between total surrender and total war. Kang understood that. He did not blame them. Fear was reasonable. The Varric ship was still in orbit, still visible from the ground, still enormous and silent and patient. But 32 nations voted no. No tribute, no people, no materials, nothing. Kang signed the declaration himself, with a plain black pen, on a piece of paper. He wrote his name slowly and clearly. Beside him, General Hyun signed. Then 29 other signatures, from leaders who had spent their careers trying to avoid exactly this kind of moment, and had now arrived at it anyway. The reply was broadcast on every Varric frequency, the same way their demand had come. It was short. It did not use complicated words. It said that humanity had received the Varric Empire's terms, and considered them carefully. It said that humanity would not be providing tribute of any kind. It said that the coordinates provided for delivering formal agreement would not be used. It ended with a single sentence that Yuna had written herself, sitting alone in a small room at 3 a.m. with a cup of cold coffee. We are not what you think we are. We suggest you reconsider. The galactic community received both messages, the Varric demand and humanity's reply, within hours of each other, because humanity had also broadcast their refusal outward, on every long-range frequency they had. They wanted the galaxy to hear it, not as a show of bravado, but as a record. Whatever happened next, someone out there would know that humanity had said no. The reaction across known space was something between disbelief and horror. Species that had been paying tribute to the Varek for centuries watched humanity's reply in silence. Some of them had never heard a refusal. They had not known one was possible. A few sent quiet, careful signals toward Earth. Not offers of help, because no one was brave enough for that yet, but something like acknowledgement, like the feeling of watching someone stand up in a room where everyone else had always stayed seated. The Varek did not reply immediately. That surprised some people. Commander Rena was not surprised. She was in charge of Earth's first fleet, the ships that officially existed, the ones that appeared on public records and defense budgets. She was also quietly in charge of several things that did not appear on any record at all. She was 38 years old, with dark eyes and a way of moving through a room that made people step aside without being asked. She had grown up reading about every naval battle in human history. She had an almost unsettling ability to see how a fight would develop before it started. "They're not replying because they're deciding how to respond," she told Kang when he asked. "They've never had to think about this before. They're used to the process: demand, acceptance, payment, repeat. We broke the process. They need a moment to find the right level of force to bring down on us." "How long do we have?" Kang asked. "Before they move?" Rena shrugged. "Days. Maybe a week. They won't wait long. If they wait too long, it looks like the refusal rattled them. They can't allow that. Then we use the time." The hidden shipyards pushed their construction schedules hard. Weapon systems were tested in dark corners of the solar system, far from any telescope that might be watched. Rena reorganized her fleet formations based on everything humanity knew about Varek ship behavior, which was limited, but not zero. Intelligence analysts working without sleep pulled apart every detail of the Varek signal, every frequency, every wavelength, looking for anything useful. Dane was one of those analysts. She was 26, quiet, and extraordinarily good at finding patterns in noise. She had been with the Defense Intelligence Division for 3 years, and had never once expected to be doing something like this. She worked 18-hour days without complaint, eating at her desk, covering her screens in handwritten notes that no one else could read. On the 4th day after the refusal, she found something. The Varek ship in orbit was emitting a low-level signal on a frequency that wasn't part of any communication band. It was faint and steady, like a heartbeat. She stared at it for a long time, running tests, checking and rechecking her equipment. Then she went to Kang's office and stood in the doorway. "The ship is transmitting position data," she said. "Back toward Varek space. It's a tracking beacon. They want to be able to find it, find us, from a distance, which means their fleet doesn't know exactly where we are yet." Kang looked at her for a moment. "Can we jam it?" "Yes," Dane said, "but they'll notice. Do it anyway. I want them working with incomplete information." She nodded and went back to her desk. Outside, the Varek ship stayed where it was, silent and dark and enormous. Inside it, Kang imagined something was deciding what kind of example to make of the small blue planet below. He imagined they expected it to be easy. He imagined they thought the refusal was fear dressed up as bravery, a bluff that would collapse the moment real force appeared. They did not know what was waiting for them in the dark. The 30 days ran out. No tribute arrived at the given coordinates. The Varek Empire sent its answer. The Galactic Empire demanded tribute. Humanity waged war. Part 1. The Demand. The ship appeared without warning. One moment, the sky above Earth was clear, just the usual scatter of satellites and cargo vessels moving in slow, quiet orbits. The next moment, something else was there. Something enormous. It did not fly in from a distance. It did not approach slowly. It simply appeared, the way a nightmare appears, suddenly, completely, and without asking permission. It was bigger than anything humanity had ever put into space. Bigger than any space station. Bigger than most cities. Its hull was dark and smooth, the color of deep water, and it caught the sunlight in a way that made it look almost alive. No windows, no visible engines, just size and weight and the silent promise of power. Every telescope on Earth turned toward it. Every radar system screamed. Governments called each other in a panic. Military satellites repositioned. Fighter pilots sat in their cockpits waiting for orders that no one knew how to give. Children pointed at the sky from their backyards, and parents stood beside them with no words at all. For 6 hours, the ship did nothing. It just hung there, above the planet, watching, if something that large could be said to watch. It sat in a low orbit, close enough that people with simple binoculars could see it from the ground. Close enough to make every person on Earth feel small. Which, Admiral Kang suspected, was exactly the point. Kang was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with short gray hair, and a face that had seen too many long nights and not enough good news. He stood in the main operations room of the United Earth Defense Command, deep underground, in a facility that most civilians didn't know existed. Around him, screens covered every wall. Analysts moved fast, talking in low, urgent voices. Data poured in from every corner of the planet. He watched the ship on the central screen and said nothing for a long time. "Any response to our signals?" he finally asked. "Nothing," said the young officer to his left. "We've tried every frequency. Radio, laser pulse, quantum band, everything. No reply." "Keep trying." Chief Diplomat Yuna stood near the back of the room, reading something on a tablet. She was younger than Kang by almost 20 years, with sharp eyes and a calm way of speaking that made people listen without realizing they were doing it. She had spent her career talking to difficult people in difficult rooms. She had negotiated trade agreements, ended border conflicts, and once talked a separatist group out of blowing up a water treatment facility using nothing but coffee and patience. She had never negotiated with something from another star system. But she didn't look afraid. "They'll talk when they're ready," she said, not looking up from her tablet. "They came here for a reason. They'll say what it is." She was right. After 6 hours of silence, the alien ship broadcast a signal. Not on one frequency, on all of them. Every device on Earth that could receive a signal received it at the same time. Phones, radios, televisions, satellites. The message was clear and perfectly translated into every human language, which meant whoever sent it had been listening to humanity for a very long time, without saying hello. The message was short. It identified the sender as the Verek Empire, a governing body that controlled over 400 star systems, and had done so for more than 3,000 years. It stated that Earth and its colonies had been observed and assessed. It stated that humanity was a developing civilization, and therefore subject to the laws of the Empire. And then, in language that was polite, in the way that a boot on a throat can be polite, it delivered the demand. Tribute. Every year, humanity would provide the Verek Empire with a set quantity of raw materials: iron, rare earth metals, water, biological samples, and a number that made Kang's hands go still when he read it. 100,000 people. Workers, the message said, for labor and research. They would be treated well. They would serve the Empire. They would not return. In exchange, the Verek would not destroy the planet. That was the deal. That was all of it. There was no negotiation offered, no room for questions. The message ended with a deadline, 30 days, and a set of coordinates in orbit where humanity's formal agreement was to be delivered. If no agreement came, the consequences would be, the message said, significant. The operations room was completely silent after the broadcast ended. Kang read the message 3 times. Then he set down the printed copy, slowly, on the desk in front of him, General Hyun was already on the line from the Pacific Command. He was a tall, lean man who spoke in short sentences and never wasted words. "I've read it," he said through the speaker. "Your thoughts?" "I think they've done this before," Kang said. "Many times, to many civilizations, and it worked every time." "That explains the confidence," Hyun said. "It does," Kang agreed. "What do we tell the council?" Kang looked at the screen again, at the ship, at the size of it. He thought about the 400 star systems, the 3,000 years, the certainty in that message, the absolute bone-deep certainty that humanity would do what it was told, because everything else always had. He thought about what humanity had survived to get to this point. The diseases, the famines, the wars that had burned whole countries to the ground. The long, terrible centuries of people hurting each other, and the world clawing its way back anyway. He thought about how many times someone had told humanity that it was finished, that it had lost, that it should accept the result. He thought about how that had always gone. "Tell the council, we need an emergency session," Kang said. "Tonight." Yuna had been quiet through the whole exchange. Now she set her tablet down on a nearby desk and walked to stand beside Kang. She looked at the ship on the screen, the same way she might look at a difficult problem in a negotiation. Not with fear, but with focus, like she was already working out the angles. "They think we'll say yes," she said quietly. "Most civilizations probably did," Kang replied. Yuna nodded slowly. "Then they don't know us very well." "No," Kang said, "they don't." Outside, across the planet, people were scared. That was understandable. The ship in the sky was real and large, and the message had been heard by everyone. There were protests in some cities and prayer gatherings in others. Some people packed bags without knowing where they planned to go. Some people sat on rooftops and stared up at the dark shape passing overhead, and felt something ancient and cold move through them. But in other places, in barracks and shipyards and research labs and command centers that the world didn't officially know about, other people were doing something different. They were getting to work. The Varick Empire had given humanity 30 days to agree. They had made a very serious mistake.